Congress is preparing to potentially stick out the holidays in Washington until they can pass more coronavirus relief for the country. It seems like they might need the extra time. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell reportedly told congressional leaders it's unlikely Senate Republicans would support the current bipartisan proposal being put together. This morning, House Speaker Nancy Pelosi made clear the priority is to pass something before key programs expire.
December 26th, the unemployment insurance benefits expire. So sometime before then, hopefully that December 18th date, we would like to have this done. If we need more time, then we take more time. But we have to have a bill, and we cannot go home without it.
The Senate is set to vote on extending the government funding deadline to December 18th, the date you heard Speaker Pelosi mention there. The continuing resolution would prevent the government from shutting down Friday. Lawmakers are hoping to include coronavirus aid in the comprehensive spending bill due at the end of next week. Now, this comes as the U.S. saw its deadliest day of the pandemic Wednesday. 3,124 Americans died from COVID-19 nationwide. Over the weekend, former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb told Face the Nation the U.S. could reach nearly 4,000 deaths per day by next month. This afternoon, President Trump met with state attorneys general, including Texas Republican Ken Paxton, who filed a lawsuit asking the Supreme Court to prevent Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, and Wisconsin from casting electoral votes for Joe Biden. Paxton is currently under federal investigation after two whistleblowers claimed he broke the law by intervening in legal matters involving a friend who donated $25,000 to his 2018 campaign. Now, this has raised questions about whether Paxton is angling for a presidential pardon. Nevertheless, 17 other Republican state attorneys general filed a brief in support of the Texas lawsuit. 11 of them, including Paxton, visited the White House this afternoon. At a White House Hanukkah party last night, President Trump welcomed the lawsuit, continuing to falsely insist he won the election.
I'm 2-0. Now we'll see what happens with the second. We won it by more than the first one. That's sort of a weird deal. The first one was sort of easy. Nobody complained too much under the first one. The second one we won in a much easier way. We have tremendous cases right now. A big case. 18 states as of this moment. 18 states. They joined out of respect and out of love after they read the papers.
President-elect Joe Biden had an empty public schedule Thursday as well before introducing another batch of administration announcements Friday. CBS News has confirmed that former White House Chief of Staff Dennis McDonough will be nominated to join the Biden cabinet as Veterans Affairs Secretary. And former UN Ambassador and National Security Advisor Susan Rice will direct the incoming administration's Domestic Policy Council. Nancy Cordes, Ed O'Keefe, and Tamara Keith join me now. Nancy is CBS News Chief Congressional Correspondent. Ed is CBS News Political Correspondent with the President-elect in Delaware. And Tamara is a White House correspondent for NPR and a co-host of the NPR Politics podcast. Welcome. It's great to see you all. Nancy, I want to start with the stimulus talks. Nearly 1.4 million people filed new unemployment claims last week. Now, that's up after a short dip during the week of Thanksgiving. As we showed at the top, expanded unemployment programs are on the verge of expiring, as is an eviction moratorium for renters. Now, this is what House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said when you asked her about it this afternoon. Let's listen.
How worried should American renters be at this point that the eviction moratorium will be allowed to expire?
Well, I think that we should extend the moratorium. And there is money, funding for rent in this proposal, which is one of its appealing features that the McConnell proposal does not even reference. But it's one thing to have money to pay the rent, and that's a big advance. It would be important to extend a moratorium too, but again, that's part of their negotiation.
So, Nancy, how far apart are the two parties in their push to get something done?
Well, just take a look at that answer from Speaker Pelosi. I think if you were a renter who owed back rent and was facing eviction, you would not take a lot of comfort from that answer. She expressed solidarity, but said that her proposal is very different from Leader McConnell's on the right, and basically had no certainty that this eviction moratorium was going to be renewed. And that is the case with so many of these provisions. All of the signals today were really pointing in the wrong direction. Speaker Pelosi saying that she's really entrusting this bipartisan group of senators to negotiate some kind of compromise. At the same time, what we were hearing from Leader McConnell is that he didn't think that Republicans could support what this bipartisan group was doing. And another one of his colleagues, John Thune of South Dakota, said that he doesn't think the group's even going to be able to come to a compromise on a couple of big, important issues like liability protections. And so, with just a week or so to go before Congress wants to get out of town, this is really the time, Elaine, when you would expect the negotiators to kind of be dotting the final I's and crossing the final T's and writing up legislation so it could be voted on next week. And we don't appear at this point to be anywhere near that.
So, Nancy, as we have said many times before, this is not a new deadline. And, right. These talks have been stagnant for months, only picking up recently. So why the urgency now?
Well, look, I think it's like so many issues in Washington. You can have both sides agree that there's a problem and that they want to fix it and that they urgently need to fix it. But if they are very far apart on how to approach it, then it really doesn't matter if that urgency exists. Look at other big issues like immigration reform or health care. The gulf between the two sides is so large that they just can't come to an agreement. In this case, as in so many cases before, what Republicans are saying is, look, we do agree on some things, so let's just pass a smaller package that includes the things we do agree on, and then call it a win and come back another day. To which Democrats respond, well, if we do that, then Republicans will never come back to the table to do the bigger deal that we want to do. And one of those big issues that remains a sticking point, Elaine, is funding for state and local governments. Democrats believe that state and local governments all across this country are hurting, that they need a lot of money both to do testing and to get the vaccine disseminated as quickly as possible. And they want to help these state and local governments avoid laying off state workers, rather. Republicans argue that there's enough money that's gone out in previous relief bills and that the federal government has already spent too much. So it remains to be seen whether they can bridge that gap somehow, whether Democrats end up caving and saying, okay, we can go ahead without it. But you heard Speaker Pelosi say she's willing to stick around as long as possible, perhaps through the Christmas holiday. That's obviously something that strikes fear in the hearts of lawmakers on the right and the left, and is clearly meant to push people to the negotiating table to try to get some kind of resolution here.
All right, as millions of Americans watch with great anticipation. Meantime, President Trump's attorney, Rudy Giuliani, who has been leading his efforts to overturn the election, was released from the hospital Wednesday. And I want to play a clip from his radio show on New York radio station WABC earlier this week. Let's listen.
So it's the cocktail. It's the same protocol that the president got. Is that right?
Yes, right.
All right, so
exactly the same. His doctor sent me here.
Okay, so
he talked me into it. I didn't want to really go to the hospital, and he said, "Don't be stupid. We can get it over with in 3 days." I think if it wasn't me, I wouldn't have been put in the hospital.
Really?
Frankly.
Yeah. Well,
sometimes when you're a celebrity, they're worried if something happens to you, they're going to examine it more carefully and to do everything right.
So, Tamara, what has been the response to the treatment the president and his allies have received compared to what is actually available for the general public?
Well, and Rudy Giuliani isn't the only person who has gotten special treatment, if you will. Dr. Ben Carson, who is the HUD secretary and was hospitalized, also received the monoclonal antibody medication that is not available to the general public at this point. Rudy Giuliani, of course, also getting drugs that are not widely available. And in many parts of this country right now, people who are very sick cannot get into the hospital. People are sending oxygen tanks to people's homes because there simply aren't enough beds and not enough nurses and doctors to take care of people in some parts of the country. Meanwhile, at the White House, they are having, as that video from before, these big parties with people not wearing masks. And yes, there is testing that's done, but it's not clear. It's absolutely clear that that is not a foolproof way to control infection, as we've seen with past sort of super spreader events at the White House.
Absolutely. And Tamara, we see President Trump meeting with the state attorneys general as he continues to push to overturn his election loss. Now, a number of congressmen have just signed on to it. Is he particularly confident in this latest lawsuit as he sees these efforts rack up losses in court?
Yeah, and not just a few, more than 100 Republican members of Congress signed on to this lawsuit. What is not clear is whether this is all performative or whether they actually think it has a chance. I was texting with a high-ranking official at the Trump campaign who said they had absolutely nothing to do with this. In conversations with Trump campaign officials, my colleagues and I have found that, early on there was a legal strategy that truly was a legal strategy that, it was a narrow path. It would have been challenging. It probably wouldn't have worked. And President Trump made a decision to throw out that plan and go with the Rudy plan, which, as one person put it, was to knock over tables. And they are in the midst of the Rudy Giuliani plan. It is highly unlikely. Election law experts we talk to tell us that it is highly unlikely that this lawsuit has, this effort to get the Supreme Court to overturn an election has any better chance in the Supreme Court than it did in all of the lower courts that have laughed many of these lawsuits out of the room. So this is why the president is also now turning his attention to Congress. And what the thing that really isn't clear is, will the 14th, when the results are certified, will that change anything, or will the president just continue fighting on? It seems pretty clear he's going to continue fighting on, but the question is what happens with his allies in Congress, in particular in the Senate.
Yeah, we'll be watching that closely. So, Ed, against that backdrop, President-elect Biden is pushing forward with the transition process, building out his administration. And I want to ask about this appointment of Susan Rice to be director of the White House Domestic Policy Council. There'd been some discussion, as I understand it, of Rice for several top cabinet jobs, all the way up to Attorney General. But this role does not require Senate confirmation. Does that play into where she ended up?
Well, yes, she's somebody who is better known for foreign policy experience, having served as a national security advisor, UN ambassador, and other positions in that realm in the Obama and then the Clinton administrations back in the 90s. Here's the thing. As is the through line with most of these cabinet picks, she's close with the president-elect personally. Their offices joined each other in the West Wing during the Obama years, so she knows them well. They've been together in a lot of high-stakes meetings through the years, and he trusts her, and he wanted to find something for her to do. She could not clear a Republican-controlled Senate next year if it remains in Republican hands. She's just simply a non-starter for them, at least in this current situation, the way the Senate would be made up. She is somebody who has personally insulted plenty of them. They have significant disagreements with her otherwise. They know she has a penchant for throwing sharp elbows, and whether that's a woman or a man, they're not a fan of it necessarily up on Capitol Hill. If someone would argue that might just be sexist, well, no, they just know that she's a really aggressive operator, and they're not fans of it. So he found something else for her to do that doesn't require Senate confirmation. Domestic Policy Council chief essentially means you're kind of like the national security advisor. You bring together all the disparate parts and try to figure out what exactly specifically it is the government's got to figure out what to do in terms of domestic policy. And in that realm, in the next few years, think about it. It's going to be the economic recovery. It's going to be dealing with issues like racial justice concerns, criminal justice reform, all sorts of issues regarding education policy that they might want to change, adding to or revamping or defending the Affordable Care Act. Those are all the kinds of things that they're going to ask her to do. And by doing that role sort of within the West Wing, it keeps her from necessarily engaging with Congress, where it just seems that she's somebody they just don't want to deal with. And you know, that's just the cold, hard reality at this point. The other picks made are a reminder that the team that Joe Biden is putting together isn't necessarily a team of rivals like Barack Obama had, but more like a team of repeats. These are people who served in the Obama administration in senior positions and are now moving into other senior positions. The Dennis McDonough pick today, for example, White House Chief of Staff, comes with obvious and proven government management experience, although there's some questions about elements of his leadership and oversight of things during the Obama years. But the Department of Veterans Affairs is a sprawling operation and one that requires a significant, serious manager. Democrats have always believed that. And so they're putting him over there, believing that he can bring that place together. It's one of the largest departments, obviously has a very important job. Susan Rice holding this position with the Domestic Policy Council. Tom Vilsack coming back as the Agriculture Secretary. All of them are people who've held senior positions in the Obama administration before. And we've really not yet seen, with the exception of Catherine Tai, who's going to be the trade representative, although she worked at the U.S. Trade Representative's office during the Obama years, and Marcia Fudge, the congresswoman who's coming in from Cleveland and Akron, an outsider, or somebody who is maybe outside of the Biden bubble, or somebody that knows him. Maybe the other one being Javier Becerra, who was a member of Congress during the Obama years and has spent the last few years serving as California Attorney General. But the other thing they all have in common is most of them are likely to survive and skate through Senate confirmation should Republicans agree to hold hearings on them, even if they got disagreements with them.
All right, a lot to watch. Nancy Cordes, Ed O'Keefe, and Tamara Keith, thank you all very much.